Do not trust these 6 people, even if they're family. There is a belief so deeply embedded in human culture, so ancient and so emotionally powerful that questioning it feels almost like a moral violation. The belief that family means safety, that blood means loyalty, that the people closest to you are, by definition, the people most worthy of your trust. We grow up absorbing this belief from every direction, from the stories told to us as children, from the rituals of family life that treat closeness as a form of guarantee, from the cultural and religious traditions that place family bonds at the very center of what it means to live a good and meaningful life. We are taught in 1,000 different ways that love and trust belong together, that if someone loves you, they are safe to trust, and that the depth of a relationship is itself a measure of its reliability. But what if this belief, however emotionally comforting, is one of the most dangerous cognitive errors a human being can make? What if the very closeness that makes a relationship feel safe is, in some cases, precisely what makes it most capable of causing harm? What if trust, properly understood, is not something that should be given automatically based on relationship category, but something that must be earned, observed, and continuously evaluated based on specific patterns of behavior, regardless of how much love is present in the relationship? Yuval Noah Harari, drawing on history, psychology, and evolutionary biology, has pointed toward a disturbing truth that most of us spend our lives avoiding. The people most capable of doing us serious harm are not strangers. They are the people we have decided, often without examination, to trust completely. And among them, there are specific types, not necessarily specific individuals, but recognizable patterns of behavior and relationship dynamic that consistently prove most dangerous to our well-being, our judgment, and our capacity to see reality clearly. This is not an argument against love. It is not a counsel of paranoia or a prescription for emotional isolation. It is something more precise and more difficult. It is an invitation to distinguish between love and trust, to recognize that these two things are not the same, do not require each other, and that conflating them may be one of the most common sources of preventable human suffering. The first type of person you must learn not to trust blindly, even within the circle of family and deep friendship, is the person who consistently prioritizes their comfort over your truth. Every human being has a preference for comfort. We would all rather hear things that confirm our existing beliefs, validate our current choices, and reassure us that we are doing well. But some people make this preference structural. They organize their relationships around the avoidance of uncomfortable honesty in ways that seem, on the surface, like kindness, like support, like love. They are the ones who always tell you that your business idea is brilliant, even when it has obvious and serious flaws. They are the ones who validate your grievance against every person who has ever hurt you, without ever gently suggesting that you might have played a role in the conflict. They are the ones who confirm your suspicion about a friend, your negative interpretation of a colleague's behavior, your darkest reading of a situation. Because agreement feels like closeness to them, and disagreement feels like threat. They surround you with a warm fog of validation that feels like support, but functions like blindness. The danger of this type is not immediately visible, because what they offer in the short term genuinely feels good. Being told what you want to hear is pleasant. Being surrounded by people who never challenge your perception creates a sense of security that can feel like love. But over time, the absence of honest friction in your closest relationships leaves you with a progressively distorted picture of yourself and your situation. You make decisions based on an inflated assessment of your own judgment, because no one close to you has consistently offered the corrective friction of honest disagreement. You fail to recognize your own patterns because no one who loves you has been willing to name them clearly. You walk into avoidable disasters because the people who saw them coming chose your momentary comfort over your long-term well-being. The person who always tells you what you want to hear is not protecting you. They are, in a very real sense, abandoning you to your own uncorrected errors. Harari's work on the power of shared narratives and cognitive biases illuminates why this type of person is so dangerous. Human beings are not naturally calibrated for accurate self-assessment. We systematically overestimate our own abilities, underestimate our own biases, and interpret ambiguous information in ways that confirm what we already believe. The people around us serve, ideally, as a corrective mechanism, a source of external perspective that partially compensates for the limitations of our own self-perception. When those people are systematically oriented toward agreement rather than accuracy, that corrective mechanism fails. And a person whose closest relationships provide no honest friction gradually loses their grip on reality in ways that are invisible from the inside, precisely because the people best positioned to show them what is happening have chosen not to. The second type of person whose trust must be approached with extreme caution is the person who weaponizes vulnerability. Intimacy, genuine intimacy, involves a specific and profoundly important kind of risk. When you allow another person to know your fears, your failures, your insecurities, and your deepest uncertainties, you give them something. You give them a map of where you are most sensitive, most doubtful, most easily hurt. In a healthy relationship, this map is held with care, used only to love you better, never deployed against you. The person who weaponizes vulnerability does something different. They receive your honest self-disclosure with apparent warmth and acceptance, creating a sense of safety that encourages deeper and deeper sharing. And then, when conflict arises, when their interests diverge from yours, when they want something you're not giving them, they use what you shared against you. Your admitted fears become ammunition. Your disclosed failures become evidence in arguments about your character. Your shared uncertainties become proof of your inadequacy when convenient. This pattern is particularly dangerous because it corrupts the very mechanism of intimacy itself. Human beings need to be known by others, need to share their genuine inner experience with at least some people in their lives, not merely as a preference, but as a psychological necessity. When the experience of being known becomes associated with eventual betrayal, people often respond by closing off entirely, by presenting only curated and managed versions of themselves, even in their closest relationships, which produces a different but equally serious form of damage. The person who weaponizes vulnerability does not merely harm you in the specific moments when they deploy what you shared against you. They teach your nervous system that openness is dangerous. And that lesson, once learned from someone deeply trusted, is very difficult to unlearn, even in relationships that are genuinely safe. Harari's analysis of how power operates in human relationships is relevant here. He observes that information has always been a form of power, and that those who control information about others hold a particular kind of leverage over them. In intimate relationships, the information exchanged is of the most sensitive possible kind. The person who collects that information while presenting themselves as a safe container for it, and who then demonstrates willingness to use it strategically when their interests require, has revealed something essential and important about how they understand the relationship. They understand it as a resource rather than as a bond. And once that understanding is revealed, no amount of subsequent warmth or apparent closeness changes the fundamental fact that they have shown you who they are. The third type is perhaps the most difficult to recognize because they are often among the most loving, most devoted, most apparently selfless people in your life. They are the people whose help always comes with invisible strings. The parent whose generous financial support is accompanied by the implicit or explicit expectation of gratitude expressed through compliance. The friend whose constant availability and emotional generosity gradually, subtly, creates a sense of obligation that begins to constrain your choices. The partner whose sacrifices, always noted and sometimes itemized, accumulate into a debt that you are expected to repay through deference, loyalty to their preferences, and the gradual subordination of your own needs and desires to theirs. This is the person whose love functions as a transaction even when they genuinely believe it does not, even when they would be sincerely hurt and confused to hear it described that way. The reason this type is so difficult to recognize and so important to understand clearly is that the genuine love is real. The help is real. The sacrifice is often real. These are not necessarily cynical or consciously manipulative people. Many of them believe entirely in the unconditional nature of their own love and would deny with complete sincerity that anything is expected in return for what they give. But the pattern of what happens when you fail to meet the implicit expectations reveals the actual structure of the arrangement. When you make a choice they disapprove of, the sacrifices are mentioned. When you assert needs that conflict with their preferences, the history of their generosity is invoked. When you draw a boundary, the depth of their love is deployed as evidence that the boundary is unnecessary and hurtful. Love is real, but it is also a lever, and the lever gets used whether or not either party fully acknowledges it. The fourth type of person whose trust requires careful calibration is the person who consistently reframes every conflict in a way that positions themselves as the wronged party, regardless of the actual facts of the situation. This is the person who, in every disagreement, somehow arrives at the position of victim, whose account of every interpersonal difficulty casts the other parties as sources of harm and themselves as patient sufferers of injustice, who, when you attempt to describe how their behavior affected you, responds with a detailed account of how your very act of raising the issue is itself a form of harm being done to them. This pattern is sometimes called a victim mentality in popular psychology, but that label can be reductive and unfair when applied too broadly. What is being described here is something more specific. It is the consistent, reliable, structural inability to occupy the position of the one who caused harm rather than the one who suffered it, even in situations where the evidence strongly suggests the former. The danger of this type is multidimensional. At the most immediate level, it makes genuine conflict resolution impossible. When one party to a conflict cannot entertain the possibility that they contributed to it, the conversation cannot progress toward actual understanding or repair. Every attempt to address a problem becomes an argument about who is the real victim, which generates more conflict rather than less, and which exhausts the person trying to have an honest conversation to the point where they eventually stop trying. Over time, this creates a relationship dynamic in which one person bears the entire burden of self-examination and accountability, while the other is permanently exempt from it. A profoundly unequal arrangement that quietly erodes the psychological well-being of the person doing all the examining. At a deeper level, prolonged exposure to a person who consistently casts themselves as victim in all circumstances can subtly distort your own perception of reality. When someone you love and trust consistently presents a version of events that exonerates them and implicates everyone around them, and when this version is presented with genuine emotional conviction rather than obvious calculation, it becomes difficult to maintain confidence in your own perception of what actually happened. You begin to question your own memory. You wonder whether your interpretation of events is unfair.